Hi, my name is Grace Fleckenstein, and I will be presenting on Sandra Cisneros, her literary career, and her famous book, The House on Mango Street. Sandra's childhood and early life. She was born on December 20th, 1954, in Chicago, Illinois. She was the third of 7 kids in her family, yet she was the only daughter. She was born to her father, Alfredo, and mother, Elvira. Her father, throughout her whole childhood, got various jobs both in Chicago and in Mexico City to support her family. This sequentially led to her family constantly moving between the two countries, US and Mexico. I'm guessing this was very difficult transitioning back from one to the other because the countries and cultures of each are very different. Being the only daughter and moving so much caused Sandra to often feel lonely, which eventually was instrumental for her career as a writer, as well as a poet, short story writer, novelist, essayist, performer, and writer, because she used the lonely feeling she often felt while growing up to fuel her characters' feelings and lives throughout their experiences in the books. Her mom, Elvira, was aware of social issues and often talked about them with Sandra, which also heavily influenced Cisneros' writing because she often talked about the working class and also economic, gender, and racial inequality, especially within the US. Other inspiration Sandra Cisneros talks about in the introduction of The House on Mango Street is that she held the unique spot as being a Mexican American woman because many Mexican American women don't share their stories or have a space to share their stories. So her being able to write this book and share her experiences offered insight of what it's like to be a Mexican American woman living in the United States. Later, for college, Cisneros received her Bachelor of Arts from Loyola University of Chicago in 1976 and her Master of Fine Arts from the University of Iowa in 1978. Cisneros' literary career. Her first book that she wrote and published, she did 2 years after graduating from Iowa in 1980, and her book was titled Bad Boys. This story was about being a defiant young girl who doesn't want to follow society's standards for what a girl and woman should be like. Sandra Cisneros is best known for her second book that we read, The House on Mango Street, and this was published in 1984. Cisneros is also known for her short story collection called Woman Hollering Creek and Other Stories, which she wrote in 1991. This is about her life as a Mexican American woman living in the US. Since then, she has written 11 books, many of them that are bilingual, and some of them even in full Spanish or full English. Her most recent book is titled Puro Amor, and it was published in 2018. This book contains similar themes to her others, including economic and gender inequality. Today, Sandra Cisneros is 67 years old and continues to write for smaller companies, but hasn't put out a book since 2018. The House on Mango Street. This book, as I said before, was published in 1984, and it's about a young Mexican American girl, Esperanza, and her experiences navigating and experiencing life after moving to the neighborhood on Mango Street. She lives in this house with her family and just writes stories of what it's like to live in this neighborhood and most of her neighbors. This book was very powerful for its time because, as Cisneros wrote in the intro, she has not heard, read, or even seen books or stories similar to her own as a Mexican American woman living in the US. On page Roman numeral 14 in the introduction, Cisneros says, "Then it occurred to me that none of the books in this or in any of my classes in all the years of my education had ever discussed a house like mine." This story, The House on Mango Street, helps shift the center to what other life experiences and perspectives may be like, since most literature, especially what is used as books and textbooks in U.S. schools and education system is written by and for white men. Esperanza, her family, and her neighbors are clearly not white males, so they didn't experience the white privilege that white people and white males mainly get to experience. And this white privilege means that there are no additional obstacles and barriers in society for white people's day-to-day life. Having the availability to hear a perspective of a Mexican-American woman shifts the center to someone who doesn't often get space to share their story. So that's why the house on Mango Street is so important. So a few of the main themes I recognize throughout the book include growing up and maturing, gender inequality, and economic inequality. Growing up and maturing is seen in Esperanza's story because she starts to lose her childhood innocence throughout the book. In the situation on page 119 where Tito and his friends say Sally has to kiss them to get her keys back, Esperanza becomes infuriated. She tries to tell Tito's mom that he's doing something bad, but she just seems to brush it off and not really care. And Esperanza even then takes her anger out by taking a brick and threatening the boys almost with it. Later, in the chapter titled Red Clowns, Esperanza says she was sexually assaulted at the carnival with a similar group of guys. I don't think Esperanza would have realized the significance of the way Tito and his friends treated Sally in the beginning of the book, and I don't think she would have realized the severity of when she was sexually assaulted, also at the beginning of the book, displaying that she has later outgrown the childhood innocence that she once had. She also alludes to growing up throughout the story multiple times by saying that her feet are getting further away from her, which I think is a really interesting and fun way of showing that Esperanza is growing up and getting taller throughout the book. Gender inequality is seen in Sally's story, who is abused by her dad for wearing risque clothes and talking to boys. I think if Sally were a boy, her father would most likely not have reacted in the same way if he was talking to girls, like vice versa. So therefore it's a double standard because the way that boys are treated in this situation is different than girls. Later in this chapter, Linoleum Roses, Sally gets married. She's younger, hasn't even gone into 8th grade yet, so she's very young, but she gets married to move out of the house from her dad and his abuse, but ends up marrying an abusive man, so the cycle of abuse for her continues. Again, if she were a man, she probably would not have rushed out of the house at such a young age because she would not have experienced the same treatment from her dad. Esperanza recognizes gender inequality throughout the book by growing out of old patriarchal ways of thinking, meaning where males hold the majority of the power in society. For example, she sees women like Rafaela and does not want to live a life like that. To me personally, I think Rafaela represents the negative side of the American dream because though marriage and families in the American dream are supposed to be happy and where the husband and wife just get along, her husband gets to do whatever he wants while she sits locked up, according to him, in the house while he is gone doing whatever. This reminds me so much of Rapunzel, who was a Disney princess controlled by others her whole life and locked up in her place of residence too. Rafaela can also only talk to others like Esperanza and her friends through a window to the outside, similar to Rapunzel. Esperanza also moves away from patriarchal ideals because on page 132, she says she wants a house all to her own, yet does not talk about wanting to have a husband and a family to care for in the house, just a house to herself. Patriarchal ideals would suggest that women should take care of their husbands and children, but Esperanza doesn't want that life and isn't wanting that just because it's the ideals of many others. Economic inequality is apparent throughout the whole book because the neighborhood that Esperanza and her family live in is lower income, and the people that are in it are outcast in society because of that. In the chapter titled Bums in the Attic, Esperanza talks about how when she owns her own house, she won't forget where she came from, and says that she'll let this quote-unquote bums in the attic because she knows how it is to be without a house. On page 108 in the same chapter, it says, floorboards will squeak upstairs. Rats, they'll ask. Bums, I'll say, and I'll be happy. This quote and this book in general proves that the people in Esperanza's neighborhood are not and should not be considered bums because they all have lives of their own and have just as much worth as any other human, whether they live in a low-income neighborhood or high-income neighborhood.